It might be a disruption that is caused by a natural disaster. It could be a disruption to their ability to operate. It could be a disruption of data, like a major cybersecurity incident or a cyber extortion ransomware attack. Or it can be a reputational problem where the company has made a bad decision and that has caused harm to their reputation. Or sometimes those reputational issues are caused by executive malfeasance or even the CEO's malfeasance, from sexual harassment to assault to embezzlement. I mean, there's all kinds of different behavioral issues. Everyone's human, where these kind of mistakes are made, and it impacts the organization's ability to accomplish their mission. And that's a crisis. When you boil it down to the basics, we think about an organization having a crisis management plan and a crisis management team. And the most important part of what goes into that plan is having a clear, consistent way of understanding how the company defines a crisis, how it will get a group of leaders together to collaborate on managing that crisis. And that team, that crisis management team, is made up of leaders that cut across the silos in an organization, including HR, that come together to really collaborate and make the best decisions for the organization, and then communicate the decisions that they've made internally and then externally from the organization. And it's important to have all the right subject matter experts there and all of the core parts of the organization, the way the org is laid out, should be a part of that so that you can have a good cross-functional representation of what needs to happen during that crisis. I think about human resources as being a critical part of a crisis management team because at the end of the day, the company is made up of people. And no matter what the crisis is, there is a human element to that crisis that we have to be able to work through. And that impacts the organization's ability to attract and retain talent. So, you can think about even in a cybersecurity incident that happens, and you're like, well, what's the HR impact? Well, there could be human resources data involved, employee data. There could be healthcare data involved in that impacts employees. You could have employees that are involved in the incident. And then these kind of cybersecurity incidents cause a significant amount of stress within the organization. And there's an HR element to that too, of how do we help the team work through the crisis that they're confronted with and manage what we learn coming out of that. I think HR should be a part of the crisis management process in terms of helping the organization develop effective plans, like any member of the crisis management team. They should specifically think about processes that would help the company in a crisis that falls into what we would think of as the traditional HR roles. Two simple examples. When we're building crisis programs, we typically look to the HR organization to help us understand how will you verify the well-being of your team during a crisis. You have a natural disaster, a tornado that impacts a location. How will HR validate that everyone is safe? Or the second order impacts, are they safe at home? Were their homes impacted, and do they need assistance in that way? But also, how would you, when a team has gone through a critical incident, how would you support them through your employee assistance program? Or do you have an ability to bring in grief counselors and do some group discussion to really help the team work through that experience? All of those, I think, are important preparation steps that fall into HR's world. I always think about leaders in that space as having two principal roles. HR is there first as the subject matter expert in working with the team and understanding all of the traditional HR roles of how do we support the team, how do we help them through benefit challenges, how do we make sure we take the human lessons that we learn and apply those coming out of the crisis or during the crisis. The second is HR is a critical leader in the organization. And like any leader on the crisis management team, I want them to wear that strategic leader hat and help the organization think about the challenges in front of them during that crisis and provide candid guidance and feedback to the team. There's a couple things. One is it's to be the leader on making sure we're taking care of the team that has been impacted. So, what are the impacts to employees? How can we best support them with existing benefits and capabilities the organization has? And do you need to do something different because of the uniqueness of this situation, as we all did during the pandemic? Um, then I would say there's also just the long-term recovery effort that becomes a little bit crisis dependent. So, for example, if the crisis was a violent incident, you had a, God forbid, an active assailant, active shooter situation, and you've had employees that have been killed or injured, you have the immediate impact of how do you support those families and how do you support the team that these folks worked with. But the longer impact is what will that mean for the organization in the long haul? What will that mean for that facility? Do we need to do renovations? Will the team even want to go back to that site and work again? And these are all things that I think HR, working with like a security team and others, are well positioned to take the lead on following a crisis. In the post-pandemic era, um, I think are along the lines of things that were happening anyway, and the pandemic just accelerated some of these trends. But we used to think about disruption to a building as being a really catastrophic impact, and we needed to do all of these things in terms of alternate work sites. 4 years after the pandemic started, I think we really look at that and say, well, for the most part, if we're not in manufacturing and we're not in healthcare delivery, most of this work can be done remotely. So it's changed how we think about some of that in terms of what we need to plan for and how we need to respond to those things. I also think that it's also created the situation where we've had to find new ways to support the team because, it used to be in most cases, you saw the team every day and you could gauge where things stood. And it's harder in this kind of remote forward environment we're all in to be able to have that eyes on understanding of where does the team sit? What's morale like? What is this? How has this crisis impacted them? And so I think it's created um, new challenges as the workplace has shifted.